So we are learning Likkutei Sichot, Volume 2, Parshas Devarim, Section 1. בקשר לשבת הנוכחית, שבת חזון, ישנו פתגם של הרב הקדוש רב לוי יצחק מברדיצ'ב, נשמתו עדן, שבשבת חזון מראים מבית המקדש השלישי, חזון מלשון ראייה, אלא שזו ראייה מרחוק, וזה תוכן שבת חזון. So regarding our present Shabbos, which is also called not just the Shabbos of Devarim, but the Shabbos of Chazon, literally because the beginning of the Haftarah is Chazon Yirmiyahu, the vision of Yirmiyahu, who saw the destruction of the temple and so on. He saw it first in a prophecy, and then he saw it physically. There is a saying from the Holy Rebbe, Reb Levi Yitzchak Berdichev, that on Shabbos Chazon, and in this Shabbos, Marim et Bet HaMikdash HaShlishi, the third temple is shown to every person, except that this is a vision from afar. In Yiddish, he calls it is a Zain fun der Weitens. Der Weitens. So I don't know if der Weitens means afar. But that's how they translated it even in the original Sichot. Re'iyah merachok, to see from afar. And v'zeh tochen shalat chazon, to see from afar, that is the essence, the content of this Shabbos. לאור האמור יובן הקשר שבין שבת חזון לבין פרשת דברים, שהרי קביעות שבת חזון היא לעולם פרשת דברים. So according to this we can understand the connection between Shabbos Chazon, the Shabbos of vision, and the Parsha of Devarim. Because every year, Shabbos Chazon, this is part of the Jewish calendar, that the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, which is called Shabbos Chazon, is always in conjunction with the reading of Parshas Devarim, the first Parsha of the book of Deuteronomy. בפרשת דברים נפתח ספר משנה תורה, למרות שהכל תורה אחת, שונה משנה תורה מן החומשים הקודמים, בכך שבשנה תורה נאמר לדור שנכנס לארץ ישראל. So he says, how is the book of Deuteronomy different? Even though it's all one Torah, but the book of Deuteronomy does have a very significant difference. You would think that he would say that Moshe said it from himself, but it doesn't say that. It says because of the audience. The book is different because of the audience it's speaking to. Who is it speaking to? Deuteronomy was said to the generation that came into the land of Israel, whereas the rest of the Torah was said to the generation that left Egypt. And we know that they passed away in the wilderness. לכן, להזהיר בקשר לעניינים מסוימים, שמתחילה לא היה צורך להזהיר אותם. Therefore, the book of Deuteronomy includes what we could call warnings, or at least heads up about issues that were not required to be thought about for the generation that left Egypt. Why? Because there's a difference between them. The generation that left Egypt, Dor HaMidbar היה דור דעה, is what we call a generation of awareness, of knowledge. What kind of knowledge? אנשיו היו בדרגתו של משה רבינו שהייתה לו ראייה באלוקות. Its members, those who left Egypt, reached the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. How did they reach the level of Moshe Rabbeinu? We know that they all experienced the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu at Mount Sinai. That is what the giving of the Ten Commandments was. It was an instance in which everyone went up to God's level. The Rambam, for instance, says that in the Moreh Nevuchim, that they all heard the voice, but they didn't hear the words. Very interesting distinction. What does it mean you heard the voice but you didn't hear the words? The voice is like the voice print. The words are the content. They all recognized when the prophecy began, they only heard, they didn't see. So they heard that this was God speaking. But they couldn't make out the words. You recognize a voice, but you can't understand what he's saying. Why? Because they're completely besides themselves. Hearing the voice of God, Mishama, קול אלוקים חיים מדבר מתוך האש ויחי. Is it possible to hear the voice of a living God coming out of the fire and survive? They didn't. Their neshama left. They had a type of death that they experienced. He says. What they recognized was that this is the voice of God. This is what their prophecy was. And then they said, "Daberita ata imanu v'al yedaber Elokim itan." So they said, we don't want to be in a state where we have to try to make out what these words are saying, what this voice is saying. We want you, Moses, to speak. Why? Because we see that you're not moved. You don't fall on your face when you hear God's voice. You're able to keep composed. So he says what? Right, you've heard it, but you have some incredible ability that we don't have. You're able to hear this voice and make out the words without falling over. So they were moving back and forth, but Moshe Rabbeinu was there, was looking at this. So he said, please, if the point of moving us back and forth is to get us to understand, we can't make out the words. It's too much for us. So you tell us what it's saying. But they heard, and apparently the moment you've heard it, and somebody says to you, this is what it said, then you say, yeah. There's a recognition that those were the words that you were hearing in some garbled way. But that's what he did for them. So they're called a generation of knowledge, a generation of awareness. Why? Because they had been privileged to have the same level of prophecy as Moshe Rabbeinu. Here he says, and Moshe Rabbeinu himself did see godliness. He saw the backside, he didn't see the front side, but he saw godliness. So in any case, they had an understanding of this. But, אילו אנשי הדור שנכנס לארץ כבר באו במגע עם גשמיות ולפיכך חסרה להם הראייה באלוקות. But those who came into the land of Israel, this generation is going into the land of Israel, they already had call it affinity to the physical aspect of reality, and therefore they did not have the same level of recognition of godliness. לדידם לא הייתה אלא שמיעה בלבד, ככתוב, ואתה ישראל שמע. For them, so I stress too much the voice. Again, his point was that the generation in the wilderness also had a level of sight, like Moshe Rabbeinu. And we said the sight is that they see the backside, not just the voice. And they saw the sounds, right? They saw the voice. That's the way to put it. The generation that came into the land of Israel was not able to see anymore. They didn't have this ability anymore. What could they do? They could only hear. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu says that a number of times in this book, V'ata Shema Yisrael. And now hear, O Israel. Now it's up to your sense of hearing. ההבדל בין ראייה לשמיעה, what is the difference between seeing and hearing? ראייה דבר מסוים אינה מוגבלת, אין בה מיצרים והגבלות. כלומר, משראה אדם את הדבר, שוב לא יזיזו שום דבר ממקומו להחדיר בו ספקות בדבר, כיוון שבעצמו ראה אותו. So he says, when it comes to seeing, once you've seen something, nobody can make you doubt what you saw. If you've seen it, there are no limits. There are no limits on your awareness of it. On the other hand, כשאדם שומע דבר מסוים, אף שהשמועה נקלטת אותה שעה, היטב בקרבו, when a person hears something, even if at that moment he hears it very well and it affects him strongly internally, still, עלול הדבר להתערער באמצעות קושיה. You can ask him a question, you can challenge what he understood, and that will make him doubt what he heard. שלום. פרט זה מוכיח שגם בשעה שהעניין נקלט לכאורה גם אז הוא בהגבלה. Meaning that even when it's been integrated, it still is limited. What does it mean it's limited? That it can still be challenged. It can still change. It can still go through changes. לפיכך במפני תורה שנאמר לדור שנכנס לארץ שלא הייתה לו אלא בחינת שמיעה באלוקות, יש צורך לצוות המסירת נפש וכדומה, דברים שלדור המדבר לא היה צורך לצוות ולהזהיר עליהם. So he says, for this reason, in the book of Deuteronomy, there is also, Moshe Rabbeinu adds, the commandment of self-sacrifice. That you have to give your life even. You have to invest yourself in such a way that it's as if giving your life. עם זאת, למרות שהדור שנכנס לארץ הייתה בדרגה פחותה מזו של דור המדבר, אלא גם יתרון שלא היה בדור המדבר. עליו נאמר לגבי דור המדבר, כי לא באתם עד עתה אל המנוחה ואל הנחלה, והכוונה לשילו בירושלים לאחר כניסה לארץ. So they had also, even though they could only hear, they didn't see, they still had an advantage over, they were superior, at least in one aspect, to the generation that came out of Egypt, because they came to the Promised Land. And they came to Shiloh and Jerusalem. They were able to build Jerusalem. They were able to build a house for God. הטעם בכך הוא משום שדווקא מתוך הירידה עצמה, מתוך שהחלו בני ישראל לבוא במגע עם דברים גשמיים ודרגות נחותות, ניתנה הזדמנות לביצוע הכוונה האמיתית בעניין מנוחה ונחלה. How did this happen? Exactly because of it. Because they were more connected to the physical. So then they were able to build what we call the physical temple, the physical presence of godliness in the world. So, what do we have here? That the descent causes an advantage. נמצא שתוכן שבת פרשת דברים מציין שני עניינים הופכים. So, Shabbos Devarim is really composed of two opposites. On the one hand, a great descent. On the other hand, through the descent, you come to the true ascent. What's the descent? Okay. The descent is that this is a generation that now is no longer connected. Okay. This generation is no longer connected to seeing godliness. It's now hearing it. On the other hand, the reason that led them to this descent is also what leads them to the ascent of being able to build a temple, to make godliness, bring it into the physical world. You were going to say? Yeah, ירידת אורח חיים. ועניין זה גם בשבת חזון. And this same principle of descent for the sake of ascent is exactly what happens in Shabbos Chazon, in the Shabbos in which we are before Tisha B'Av. שני ההפכים. מצד אחד חל השבת זו בתשעת הימים. So both opposites are in the Shabbos also. On the one hand, this is the Shabbos that's in the 9 days. ותירא מזו היה שבת שלפני תשעה באב, and all the more so that it's the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av. זמן החורבן, the time of the destruction. So it's a tremendous descent. The lowest we come in the Jewish calendar. ואילו מצד שני, but on the other hand, דווקא על ידי הירידה עתידה לבוא התכלית העלייה. It's specifically because of this descent that we can come to the greatest ascent. כפי שנאמר בשם הרב הקדוש, הרב לוי יצחק מברדיצ'ב, שבשבת חזון מראים את בית המקדש של השישי. זה שנעלה מקודמיו, ייבנה במהרה בימינו על ידי משיח צדקנו. So because of this, we're able to see the third temple. Now what is he saying? He's not saying, one more thing. He's not saying here that this is like a runner-up prize. It's like a pity prize. It's not like that. It's not that Hashem is showing us the third temple because He wants to make it up to us. No. He's saying because you feel the descent, you're worthy of making the ascent. Because you feel the descent of the 9 days, of Tisha B'Av, of all this, because you feel what's missing in the world, that's why you're privileged to see the third temple, a vision of the third temple. Okay. What?
Are you going to start now?
No.